The night air felt electric as Ava stepped out of her car, handing the keys to the valet. She smoothed down her red dress, the one she had treated herself to after landing the biggest project of her career. Tonight was supposed to be her moment, the official launch of the downtown cultural district redesign that would put her name on the map as one of Chicago's most innovative architectural designers. "You got this," she whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed over the years whenever nervousness crept in. At 32, Ava had learned to trust her instincts, especially after rebuilding her life from scratch following the breakup that had nearly broken her 3 years ago. The hotel ballroom buzzed with Chicago's elite, city officials, investors, fellow architects, and journalists all mingling under crystal chandeliers. Ava accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a small sip, letting the bubbles calm her nerves. Her boss waved her over to a group of investors. "And here she is, the brilliant mind behind the designs that won us the contract," her boss announced proudly. "Gentlemen, meet Ava Williams." Ava shook hands and explained her vision for transforming the abandoned warehouses into art spaces that honored the neighborhood's history while creating something new. She was in the middle of describing the community gardens planned for the rooftops when she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Excuse me, but is that really you, Ava?" The voice made her freeze mid-sentence. It was a voice she'd tried to forget, one that used to whisper "good morning" against her neck and "I love you" under starlit skies. Slowly, she turned around. "And, she breathed, had a champagne glass nearly slipping from her fingers. There he stood, the man who had walked away from their 5-year relationship with nothing but a note saying he needed space. Andrew looked different now. His once wild curls were cut short, and he wore a tailored suit instead of the casual clothes he preferred in college. But his eyes were the same deep brown that used to make her feel like she was home. "You look amazing," he said, his gaze taking her in like a man seeing water after days in the desert. "What are you doing here?" Ava managed to ask, excusing herself from the group of investors who had politely moved on to another conversation. "I'm working with the community outreach program for the cultural district," Andrew explained. "I had no idea you were the designer until I saw your name in the program tonight." 3 years of wondering why she hadn't been enough, 3 years of rebuilding her confidence, and here he was, standing in front of her like the universe was playing some cosmic joke. "Congratulations on the project. Your designs are incredible," he continued when she remained silent. "I always knew you'd do something extraordinary." Before Ava could respond, her boss appeared again, this time with a tall man in a perfectly fitted dark blue suit. "Ava, there's someone important you need to meet," her boss said, practically vibrating with excitement. "This is Richard Reed, the primary investor behind the entire cultural district project." The man stepped forward, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his smile reserved but genuine. Unlike most of the wealthy people Ava had met tonight, who looked at her designs with dollar signs in their eyes, Richard Reed seemed to actually see her. "Ms. Williams, your vision for this project is exactly what the city needs," he said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "I particularly appreciate how you've incorporated elements from the neighborhood's history." "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I grew up not far from there," Ava replied, momentarily forgetting Andrew's presence. "Please call me Richard," he said, "and I'd love to hear more about your connection to the area. Perhaps over dinner next week. I have some ideas about the community center design I'd like to discuss." From the corner of her eye, Ava could see Andrew shifting uncomfortably, clearly listening to their conversation. The tension in the air was so thick she could almost touch it. "That would be fine," Ava agreed, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the emotional whirlwind inside her. As Richard excused himself to greet other guests, Andrew stepped closer. "So that's the famous Richard Reed? The billionaire who's suddenly interested in community development." "He's funding the entire project," Ava said defensively. "And now he wants private dinners with the beautiful architect." Andrew commented, a hint of something, jealousy, in his voice. "It's professional," Ava replied coolly. "Unlike some people, I don't walk away from my commitments." Andrew winced at the jab. "I deserved that. But Ava, I've changed. Moving to Boston was the biggest mistake of my life. I've been back in Chicago for 6 months, building my physical therapy practice, hoping I might run into you somehow." The ballroom suddenly felt too small, too warm. Here was Andra, the man she once thought she'd marry, standing before her with regret in his eyes, while somewhere across the room was Richard Reed, a man who represented everything she'd worked toward professionally. As the evening continued, Ava found herself torn between avoiding Andra and being drawn to his familiar presence, while also being intrigued by the thoughtful questions and genuine interest Richard showed in her work whenever they crossed paths. By the time she slipped into her car at the end of the night, Ava's mind was spinning with confusion. Her perfectly ordered life had just been thrown into chaos, caught between a past she'd never fully let go of and a future full of unexpected possibilities. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Ava's downtown apartment as she sat at her kitchen island, coffee in one hand and colored pencil in the other. Her design sketches were spread across the marble surface, but she couldn't focus. Last night's unexpected reunion with Andra kept replaying in her mind. The sharp ring of her phone broke her thoughts. Unknown number. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Good morning, Ava. It's Richard Reed." His deep voice caught her by surprise. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, not at all," she said, quickly setting down her coffee and sitting up straighter, even though he couldn't see her. "What can I do for you?" "I've been looking over your community center designs again, and I had some thoughts. Are you free for lunch today?" 2 hours later, Ava found herself sitting across from Richard at a small, upscale restaurant tucked away on the top floor of one of his buildings. The view of Chicago's skyline was breathtaking. "I rarely bring business associates here," Richard admitted, pouring her a glass of water. "But something tells me you'll appreciate the architecture." He was right. The space was a perfect blend of modern lines and warm materials, steel beams balanced with reclaimed wood, floor-to-ceiling windows framed by concrete columns. "It's beautiful," Ava said, genuinely impressed. "Who designed it?" "I did, actually," Richard replied with unexpected humility. "Before I got lost in the world of investment and development. I studied architecture in college." Ava looked at him with new interest. This wasn't just another rich man throwing money at a project. He actually understood what she was trying to create. Their lunch stretched into a 2-hour conversation about design philosophy, community needs, and their shared vision for the cultural district. By the time Ava glanced at her watch, she realized she was late for a site meeting. "I'm so sorry, I need to go," she said, gathering her portfolio. "Let me drive you," Richard offered. "It's the least I can do for keeping you." Outside her office building that evening, Ava was surprised to find Andra waiting, a small bouquet of yellow tulips in hand, her favorites, she remembered with a pang. "Before you tell me to leave," he said quickly when she approached, "just know that I've spent 3 years regretting what I did. I've changed, Ava. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." The sincerity in his eyes made her defenses waver. "Andra, it's been a long day. I can't do this right now." "Just dinner," he pressed gently. "One dinner, as friends, tomorrow night." Against her better judgment, Ava agreed. Maybe closure was what she needed. The next few weeks became a blur of work days with Richard and evenings with Andra weaving in and out of her life. The Cultural District project demanded more and more of her time, with Richard requesting she personally oversee every detail. His respect for her vision was flattering, and the way he listened to her ideas made her feel valued in a way she hadn't experienced professionally before. "You're not just talented, Ava," Richard told her one evening as they reviewed plans in his office, the city lights twinkling below them. "You understand that buildings aren't just structures, they're about the people who will live their lives in them." Meanwhile, Andra kept showing up, bringing lunch to her office, sending thoughtful text messages, slowly chipping away at the wall she'd built around her heart. One rainy Saturday, he surprised her with tickets to an exhibition by her favorite artist. "You remembered," she said, touched by the gesture. "I remember everything about you, Ava," he replied softly. As they walked through the gallery, Andra pointed out details in paintings he knew would speak to her. It was unsettling how well he still knew her, despite their years apart. "I opened my own physical therapy practice," he told her over coffee afterward, "working with kids from low-income neighborhoods. Remember how we used to talk about that in college?" Ava nodded, remembering their late-night conversations about how they wanted to give back to communities like the ones they'd grown up in. "You're making that happen," she said, a hint of pride in her voice that surprised her. "I'm trying to be the man you always believed I could be," he admitted. The next morning, a sleek black car delivered a package to Ava's apartment. Inside was a rare architecture book she'd mentioned to Richard, with a handwritten note, "For the woman who's building the future of the city. Dinner tonight." Ava held the book to her chest, suddenly overwhelmed. Richard represented everything she'd worked toward: success, recognition, a chance to make her mark on the city she loved. His attention was flattering, his support for her career undeniable. But when her phone buzzed with a text from Andra, a simple "thinking of you" with a photo of a street mural they'd once admired together, her heart skipped in a way that confused her. By the end of the month, Ava found herself caught between two very different men: Richard, who offered a new and exciting future, and Andra, who reminded her of everything she'd once wanted. The architectural project that was supposed to be her sole focus now shared space in her mind with a much more personal dilemma. "Focus, Ava," she whispered to herself during a quiet moment alone at her drafting table. But the question remained: focus on what? Her career? Her heart? Or somehow finding a way to honor both? Ava stared at the email on her screen, reading it for the third time to make sure she wasn't dreaming. Richard wanted her to fly to Paris with him to tour historic buildings that could inspire the Cultural District project. Paris, the city she'd dreamed of visiting since she first fell in love with architecture in high school. "He wants me to leave tomorrow," she told her best friend Tanya over the phone, pacing around her living room. "Says his private jet will be ready whenever I am." "Girl, are you kidding me?" Tanya's voice rose with excitement. "A billionaire is flying you to Paris on his private jet. This is like a movie." "It's for work," Ava insisted, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "Mum, and what does Andra think about your work trip with Mr. Moneybags?" Ava sighed. "I haven't told him yet." The truth was, things with Andra had been going well, too well. Last weekend, he'd taken her back to their old neighborhood, showing her the community center where he volunteered, teaching kids from tough backgrounds how to channel their energy into sports rather than trouble. The pride in his eyes when he introduced her to the teenagers he worked with had stirred something in her heart she thought was long dead. But this was Paris, with Richard Reed, an opportunity that might never come again. The next evening, Ava found herself stepping onto a private jet, trying not to look as overwhelmed as she felt. The interior was all cream leather and polished wood, more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever stayed in. "First time on a private plane?" Richard asked, nervous in her wide eyes. Ava laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" "Only a little," he said with a warm smile. "I remember my first time too. I grew up taking the bus everywhere. My mom cleaned houses in the suburbs to put food on our table." This revelation surprised Ava. She'd assumed Richard had always been wealthy. "How did you go from that to?" She gestured at the plane around them. "Hard work, good timing, and a healthy dose of luck," he said, settling into his seat across from her. "But enough about me. Tell me more about what drew you to architecture." As the plane crossed the Atlantic, Ava found herself opening up about her childhood dreams, her struggles through architecture school, and the projects she hoped to design someday. Richard listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he truly cared about understanding her. Paris greeted them with golden morning light that made the historic buildings glow. Richard had arranged a private tour of buildings not usually open to the public, and Ava soaked in every detail, taking photos and making quick sketches in her notebook. "This is unbelievable," she whispered as they stood in an empty courtyard of a 17th century building. "I've only seen these places in books." "Sometimes books aren't enough," Richard said, watching her with a smile. "Some things you need to experience for yourself." That evening, they dined at a small restaurant tucked away on a quiet street, far from the tourist areas. The owner greeted Richard like an old friend, leading them to a table on a balcony overlooking a quaint square. "How do you know about this place?" Ava asked, savoring the best food she'd ever tasted. "I spent a year here after college," Richard replied, pouring her more wine. "Before I made my first million. I was broke, sleeping on a friend's couch, trying to figure out what to do with my life." "I can't imagine you broke," Ava admitted. "I was," he chuckled. Happier than I expected to be too. Money changes things, but not always in the ways people think. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted from architecture to more personal topics. Richard told her about his failed marriage, his regrets about working too much while his father was sick, and his desire to make a meaningful impact with his wealth. That's why this cultural district matters, he said, his eyes intense in the candlelight. It's not just buildings. It's about creating spaces where people can connect, where art can thrive, where communities can grow stronger. It was exactly how Ava felt about her designs, a vision she rarely found anyone else shared. Something shifted between them that night, a connection deeper than professional respect or physical attraction. The 3 days in Paris passed like a dream. Richard showed her a side of the city tourists never saw, introducing her to local architects and artists who shared their knowledge generously. They walked for hours, talking about everything and nothing. By the time they boarded the plane home, Ava felt like she'd known him for years rather than months. Her phone, which had been mostly forgotten during the trip, buzzed as they reached cruising altitude. 6 missed calls from Andra. And a text. Tanya told me you're in Paris with him. I guess I was kidding myself thinking I had a chance. Have a good life, Ava. The happiness of the trip evaporated as guilt washed over her. She hadn't even told him she was leaving. Everything okay? Richard asked, noticing her expression. Just some personal stuff, she replied, trying to smile. When they landed in Chicago, exhausted but happy, Ava was surprised to see Richard's driver holding 2 sets of flowers. These were delivered to your office, Richard explained, handing her a modest bouquet of daisies. Attached was a card from Andra. I'm sorry for the text. You deserve Paris and more. Can we talk when you're back? The second bouquet, an extravagant arrangement of roses, was from Richard. Thank you for sharing Paris with me, his card read. The city was more beautiful with you in it. Standing in the private terminal with 2 bouquets in her arms, Ava realized her heart was no longer just torn, it was in grave danger of breaking no matter which way she turned. Ava sat at the small coffee shop near her apartment, her fingers nervously tapping the ceramic mug. She'd finally agreed to meet Andra after returning from Paris, after 3 days of him texting and calling. The bell above the door jingled, and her heart jumped when she saw him walk in. Hey, Andra said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. His eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. Hi, she replied, unsure where to start. Thanks for the flowers. I should apologize for that text, he said, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. I had no right to make you feel bad about going to Paris. It's just hard to compete with private jets and billionaires. Ava sighed. It's not a competition, Andra. The trip was about work. Was it? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Because Tanya said, Since when do you and Tanya talk? Ava interrupted, surprised. Since I ran into her at the grocery store and she accidentally let slip that you were in Paris with the hot billionaire, he explained, making air quotes. I panicked. I thought I was losing you all over again. The vulnerability in his voice caught Ava off guard. This was different from the Andra who had walked away 3 years ago, the man who couldn't face difficult conversations. You know what's funny? He continued when she didn't respond. I couldn't sleep last night, so I looked up Richard Reed online. The man's done some amazing things. Built schools in developing countries, funded medical research, revitalized neighborhoods without pushing out the original residents. He shook his head with a small laugh. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't even do that right. Ava smiled despite herself. He's not what I expected either. Their coffee stretched into lunch, and for the first time since Andra reappeared in her life, Ava felt they were truly talking. No games, no agendas, just honest conversation about the 3 years they'd spent apart. I was afraid, Andra admitted as they walked around the park afterward. Afraid of how much I loved you, afraid I wasn't good enough, afraid of the big plans we were making. So I ran. He stopped walking, turning to face her. It was the biggest mistake of my life, but it taught me that running doesn't solve anything. Before Ava could respond, her phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. Mom? Ava answered, hearing the tension in her mother's voice immediately. What's wrong? 20 minutes later, Ava and Andra rushed into the city hospital. Her mother had collapsed at work and was being prepped for emergency gallbladder surgery. "I came as soon as I heard," Ava told her mother, who looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. "They say it's routine," her mother said, trying to sound brave. "Don't you worry about me." Ava squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." While her mother was in surgery, Ava called her boss to explain her absence, then texted Richard to reschedule their meeting. His response came quickly. "Don't worry about work. What hospital?" "I'm sending the best specialist in the city." True to his word, within an hour, a renowned surgeon had reviewed her mother's case and was consulting with the surgical team. Richard also arranged for her mother to recover in a private room rather than the shared space her insurance would cover. "Your boyfriend must be something special," the nurse commented as she checked her mother's vitals after surgery. "Not many people get Dr. Wilson to come in on short notice." "He's not my—" Ava began, then stopped, unsure how to explain Richard. As the hours ticked by, Andrew remained by her side, getting her coffee, making sure she ate something, and letting her nap against his shoulder in the uncomfortable waiting room chairs. He knew all her mother's favorite gospel songs and played them softly from his phone when she woke up confused after the anesthesia wore off. "You didn't have to stay," Ava told him late that night when they were alone in the hospital corridor. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "This is exactly where I need to be." Around midnight, Richard appeared in the doorway of her mother's room, a small gift basket in hand. He looked out of place in his expensive suit among the hospital's fluorescent lights. "I wanted to check on you both," he said, glancing at Andrew with a polite nod. "How is she doing?" "Better, thanks to the doctor you sent," Ava replied, genuinely grateful. "You didn't have to come all this way so late." "I had meetings in New York," he explained. "I just landed." The three of them stood awkwardly in the small room, the beeping monitors filling the silence. Andrew had his arm protectively around Ava's waist, while Richard maintained a respectful distance. "I should let you rest," Richard finally said, setting down the gift basket. "I'm flying to Tokyo tomorrow, but my assistant will check in. Whatever you need, just ask." After he left, Ava felt the weight of Andrew's gaze. "So that's him," Andrew said quietly. "Yes," she replied, too exhausted for anything but honesty. "He seems like a good man," Andrew admitted reluctantly. "But I noticed something." "What's that?" "He sent a specialist. He got your mom a private room. He brought a gift basket." Andrew's voice was gentle. "But I'm the one who held your hand all day." Ava didn't respond, but as she looked at the rumpled shirt of the man who had sat beside her for 12 straight hours, bringing her mother ice chips and charming the nurses into giving them extra blankets, something shifted in her heart. That night, sleeping in the recliner next to her mother's hospital bed with Andrew dozing in a chair nearby, Ava realized that grand gestures and wealth were one thing. But being present, truly, consistently present, was something money couldn't buy. 2 weeks after her mother's surgery, Ava stood in the middle of the construction site, hard hat firmly in place, watching as her vision slowly took physical form. The Cultural District project had reached a critical phase. Steel beams stretched toward the sky, outlining what would soon become the Community Arts Center, the heart of the entire development. "Ms. Williams." A young intern approached, tablet in hand. "The investors are here for the walkthrough." Ava took a deep breath, brushing dust from her jacket. This presentation could make or break the project's funding for Phase 2. As she rounded the corner to the makeshift meeting area, she spotted Richard among the group of investors, looking perfectly at ease in a hard hat and expensive boots that had clearly never seen a construction site before today. He caught her eye and smiled warmly, but kept his distance, maintaining the professional relationship they'd silently agreed upon since the hospital. His 2-week business trip to Tokyo had created a natural pause in whatever had been developing between them, giving Ava space to focus on her mother's recovery and the project deadlines. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ava began, unfolding the large site plans. "Thank you for coming today. I'm excited to show you how your investment is transforming this neighborhood." As she led the group through the site, explaining design choices and answering questions, Ava could feel Richard watching her with pride. The other investors peppered her with questions about timelines and budgets, but one older man, Mr. Peterson, seemed particularly combative. "These artistic flourishes are unnecessary expenses," he challenged, pointing to the curved wall that would eventually showcase local artists' work. We could save thousands by simplifying. Before Ava could respond, Richard stepped in. The artistic elements are what make this project unique, Harold. If we wanted another boring box of a building, we wouldn't have hired the best designer in the city. The conviction in his voice silenced the criticism, and Ava felt a surge of gratitude. When the investors moved ahead to examine the foundation of the theater space, Richard hung back. "You were brilliant," he said quietly. "They're impressed, even Peterson, though he'd never admit it." "Thank you for defending the design," Ava replied. "That curved wall means a lot to me." "I know," Richard said, his eyes meeting hers. "That's why I backed you. I believe in your vision, Ava, not just for this project, but for what you want to accomplish in your career." Something fluttered in her chest at his words. No one had ever believed in her professional abilities so completely without question. "I've been thinking," Richard continued, checking that the others were out of earshot. "When this project is complete, I'm planning to develop similar cultural districts in other cities: Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia. Places that need revitalization without gentrification. I'd like you to lead the design team." Ava's breath caught. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership," he corrected. "Creative control, equity in the projects. A chance to make your mark across the country, not just Chicago." It was everything she'd ever dreamed of professionally: recognition, creative freedom, the resources to make a real impact. And the way Richard looked at her made it clear this offer wasn't purely professional. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Don't say anything now," he replied. "Just think about it. We could do amazing things together, Ava." That evening, as Ava unlocked her apartment door, she was surprised to find it already open, the smell of cooking wafting into the hallway. "Hello," she called nervously, stepping inside. In the kitchen, Andrew's voice called back. She found him stirring something on her stove, her mother sitting at the counter chopping vegetables. "What's all this?" Ava asked, setting down her bag. "Your mother mentioned you've been skipping meals because of project deadlines," Andrew explained. "So we decided to make sure you eat a proper dinner tonight." Her mother smiled knowingly. "Andrew remembers your favorite, jambalaya with extra shrimp. Just like your grandma used to make," Andrew added, offering her a taste from the wooden spoon. The familiar flavors transported Ava back to family gatherings, to the comfort of traditions and shared history. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring not just the food, but the feeling of being known so completely. Later, after her mother had gone home and the dishes were cleaned, Ava and Andrew sat on her small balcony, watching the city lights. "I got some news today," Andrew said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The community center where I volunteer received a grant to expand their physical therapy program. They've offered me the director position." "And that's wonderful," Ava exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "That's what you've always wanted." "Almost everything I've always wanted," he corrected gently, his gaze steady on her face. "Ava, I know Richard Reed can offer you things I can't. Private jets, fancy dinners, career opportunities I can only dream about." "It's not about," she began, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks. About us, about what I can offer." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. "This isn't what you think. It's not a proposal, not yet anyway." He placed the key in her palm. "It's to my childhood home. I bought it last month. The house on Maple Street that you always said had the perfect porch for watching summer thunderstorms." Ava stared at the key, speechless. She remembered that house, how they used to walk by it on their way home from college, how she'd always point out its character, its potential. "It needs work," Andrew continued. "But I thought maybe we could fix it up together. Make it ours someday if that's what you want." His offer represented everything they had once planned together: a home, roots in the community they both loved, a shared future built on common ground. "I know it can't compete with designing buildings across the country," Andrew said when she remained silent. "But I also know that the little girl who grew up 3 blocks from there once told me her biggest dream was to create spaces where families could build memories." As the night air wrapped around them, Ava held the small key in her hand, feeling its weight against her palm. In her other hand, she clutched her phone containing Richard's text: "Dinner tomorrow to discuss the partnership." Two paths stretched before her, one reaching toward new heights she'd never imagined possible, the other circling back to dreams she'd once thought lost forever. Both offered by men who, in their own ways, seemed to truly see her. The morning newspaper landed on Ava's desk with a thud, her assistant's face tight with concern. "You need to see this," she said, pointing to an article on the business page. Ava's stomach dropped as she read the headline, "Reed's Cultural District Project, Merit or Favoritism?" The article questioned her qualifications, suggesting she had won the prestigious contract because of her close personal relationship with Richard Reed rather than her design talents. "Who would write this?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rumor says it was planted by Westfield Development," her assistant replied. "They lost the bid to your design." Ava's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Don't worry. I'm handling this." But the damage was spreading. By lunchtime, her email was flooded with messages from colleagues and former classmates, some offering support, others clearly enjoying the scandal. Social media was worse, with photos of her and Richard in Paris appearing on industry gossip accounts. When her office phone rang, Ava almost didn't answer it. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Have you seen the news?" It was Andra. "I have," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's not true." "Well, not the way they're making it sound." "I know that," Andrew said, his voice firm. "Anyone who's seen your work knows that." His confidence in her brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "The timing couldn't be worse. We're presenting the final designs next week." "What can I do?" he asked without hesitation. Before she could answer, her other line beeped. "I should take this. It might be Richard." "Go ahead," Andrew said. "But Ava, this doesn't change how talented you are. Remember that." The other call was indeed Richard, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I've got my legal team preparing a response. Westfield's going to regret this little stunt." "Will it make a difference?" Ava asked, staring at her design models, months of work that might now be tainted. "Of course it will," Richard assured her. "I've dealt with worse. No one's going to question your abilities when I'm done." But as the day progressed, doubt crept in. What if Richard's defense only reinforced the perception that she needed his protection? What if her work became forever linked to scandal rather than merit? By evening, Ava felt claustrophobic in her apartment, every ping on her phone bringing fresh anxiety. She was about to turn it off completely when a text from her mother came through. "Come home, baby girl. I made sweet potato pie." Her childhood home, just 20 minutes from downtown, had always been her sanctuary. When she arrived, her mother took one look at her face and opened her arms without a word. "It's not fair," Ava said, finally letting the tears flow. "I worked so hard. Those designs came from my heart, Mom. And now they're saying it was because of Richard." Her mother stroked her hair just like when she was little. "Since when do you care what people say? You've been proving them wrong your whole life." As they sat at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. Her mother returned with Andra, who carried a stack of folders. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, setting down the folders. "But I've been busy." Inside were letters, dozens of them, from community members, from professors who had taught Ava, from clients of previous projects, all attesting to her talent and integrity. "How did you do this so quickly?" Ava asked, amazed. "I called everyone I could think of who knows how brilliant you are," Andrew explained. "People were happy to help. The community center kids even made you this." He handed her a hand-painted poster that read, "Ms. Ava's buildings are the best." Ava laughed through her tears. I don't know what to say." "There's more." Andrew continued, pulling out his laptop. "I've been working with some of your former classmates. We're launching a social media campaign tomorrow showcasing your previous designs and academic awards, letting your work speak for itself." While they were talking, Ava's phone rang. Richard again. "I've arranged a press conference for tomorrow," he told her. "My PR team has prepared a statement for you. The car will pick you up at 9 a.m. at press conference." Ava repeated, suddenly uncertain. "Trust me, this is how you handle these situations," Richard said confidently. "We'll put Westfield on the defensive." After hanging up, Ava looked between Andrew's grassroots support effort and Richard's corporate damage control approach. Both men were trying to help in their own ways. "What do you think, Mom?" she asked, feeling torn. Her mother, who had been quietly observing, took Ava's hands in hers. "Only you can answer that, baby. But ask yourself who's fighting for your work and who's fighting Westfield." That night, after Andra left and her mother went to bed, Ava sat on the porch swing, thinking about the paths before her. The key to Andra's house sat in her pocket, a constant reminder of one possible future. Her phone contained Richard's carefully crafted press statement representing another. As she swung gently in the night air, a memory surfaced, her father, gone now for 10 years, sitting with her on this very swing when she was 16, looking at her early sketches. "Baby girl," he had said, "don't ever let anyone else take credit for your vision. Good or bad, own what you create." The next morning, Ava made her decision. She called Richard first. "I appreciate the press conference plan," she said, "but I need to handle this my way." "What does that mean?" he asked, clearly surprised. "It means I'm going to let my work speak for itself," she replied, feeling suddenly lighter. "No press conferences, no legal threats, just me and my designs." Richard was silent for a moment. "That's not how I would approach it," he finally said. "But it's your reputation at stake. What can I do to help?" His willingness to step back and support her decision, even when it contradicted his own instincts, showed Ava a side of Richard she hadn't fully appreciated before. Next, she called Andra. "I love what you've put together," she told him, "but I need to make one change." Later that day, Ava walked into the Cultural District community meeting that had been scheduled months ago as part of the project's transparency initiative. Instead of canceling due to the scandal, she decided to face it head-on. The room was packed, community members, press, investors, and curious onlookers drawn by the controversy. Both Richard and Andra sat in the audience, separated by several rows but equally supportive in their presence. "Thank you all for coming," Ava began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Before I show the final design plans, I want to address something. Yes, I know Richard Reed. Yes, he believed in my vision for this project. But these designs," she gestured to the models displayed around the room, "they came from my heart, my training, and my commitment to this community, the community I grew up in." She took a deep breath, looking directly at the reporters in the back row. "You can question how I got this opportunity, but you cannot question what I've done with it. So today, I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to show you exactly why my design was chosen." For the next hour, Ava walked through her plans with passion and precision, answering tough questions honestly and showcasing the thoughtful details that made her design special. As the meeting concluded with a standing ovation from community members, Ava caught the proud looks on both Richard's and Andrew's faces. In that moment, standing in her professional power, Ava realized something important about her personal dilemma. The right choice wasn't about which man could do more for her, it was about who would stand beside her while she did things for herself. 3 months later, the cultural district was coming to life. Workers installed the final glass panels on the Community Arts Center as Ava watched from across the street, her design notebook open on her lap. She sketched the scene, wanting to remember this moment, the completion of her first major project. "It's even more beautiful than the models," a familiar voice said behind her. Ava turned to find Richard standing there, looking less corporate than usual in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. "I wasn't sure you'd make it back for the opening," she said, closing her notebook. Richard had been traveling between cities, laying groundwork for his National Cultural District initiative. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, sitting beside her on the bench. This is where it all began. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the construction workers move efficiently across the site. So much had changed since that first gala night when they'd met. The newspaper scandal had actually worked in Ava's favor. Architectural magazines had picked up the story, investigated her background, and ended up featuring her designs with glowing reviews. Her phone had been ringing with new project offers ever since. "Have you thought more about my offer?" Richard asked finally. "The Detroit project breaks ground next month. The team would love to have you lead the design." Ava had been considering his partnership proposal for weeks. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, creative control, national recognition, the chance to transform multiple cities. Everything she'd worked toward professionally. "I have been thinking about it," she said carefully, "and I'm flattered truly." Richard studied her face, but there's something holding you back. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Andra. We're all set for tonight. Mom says don't be late. Ava smiled despite herself. Tonight was her mother's birthday dinner, and Andra had spent the week helping plan a surprise party at her childhood home. It's him, isn't it? Richard asked gently, noticing her expression. Ava sighed. It's complicated. Actually, Richard said with surprising wisdom, I think it's very simple. I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. The kindness in his voice caught her off guard. There was no accusation, no jealousy, just understanding. I care about you, Richard, she began. I know you do, he interrupted. But there's a difference between caring about someone and being in love with them. He smiled wistfully. I didn't get where I am by not recognizing when I'm beaten. That evening, Ava stood in her mother's kitchen, watching Andra charm her aunts and uncles just as he had years ago when they first dated in college. He fit so naturally into her family, remembering everyone's names, inside jokes, and food preferences. When her little cousin scraped her knee, it was Andra who knew exactly where the first aid kit was kept. That boy still loves you something fierce, her grandmother whispered, appearing beside Ava with uncanny timing. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Grandma, Ava admitted. There's this amazing job opportunity with Richard. Her grandmother snorted. Jobs come and go. But a man who looks at you the way that one does. She nodded toward Andra, who was helping Ava's mother light birthday candles. That's rarer than you think. After the cake and presents, Ava found herself on the back porch with Andra, the sounds of family laughter drifting through the open windows. Your mom loved her gift, Andra said, referring to the photo album they had put together, filled with restored pictures from her parents' early years. It was your idea, Ava reminded him. You always know exactly what people need. The evening air was warm, scented with her mother's rose bushes and the distant smell of rain. Andra turned to face her, his expression serious. I know what I need, he said quietly. I've always known, even when I was too scared to admit it. Ava's heart raced as he took her hands in his. I'm not rushing you, he continued. I know you have decisions to make about Richard's offer. I just want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm here. If you want the job in Detroit, we'll figure it out. If you want to stay in Chicago, that's fine too. All I know is that I don't want to lose you again. His words touched something deep inside her. Unlike before, when he had run from commitment, Andrew was now willing to adapt his life to fit with hers. He wasn't asking her to choose between her career and love. He was offering to build a life that included both. The next morning, Ava found herself walking through the empty Cultural District Center, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous main hall. The grand opening was 2 days away, but she needed this private moment with her creation. Sunlight streamed through the skylight she had insisted on, casting a perfect circle of light in the center of the room. Tomorrow it would be filled with people, but today it was just hers, the physical manifestation of her vision. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Final decision time. Detroit team needs an answer by 5 p.m. As she stood in the light, Ava thought about Richard and everything he offered: professional advancement, new cities, broader horizons. He was a good man who valued her talent and wanted to help her succeed. With him, she could become the nationally recognized architect she had dreamed of being. Then she thought about Andra, who had bought his childhood home because she once said she loved it. Andra, who had rallied community support when her reputation was questioned. Andra, who knew exactly how her mother took her coffee and which gospel songs would comfort her in a hospital room. With him, she could build the life she had always imagined in the community she loved. At exactly 4:59 p.m., Ava called Richard. I've made my decision, she said when he answered. I think I already know what it is, he replied, his tone resigned but gentle. I can't take the Detroit position, Ava confirmed, but I have another proposal for you. By the time she arrived at the grand opening celebration 2 nights later, Ava felt lighter than she had in months. The cultural district was packed with people, community members, city officials, artists, and investors all mingling together exactly as she had envisioned. Richard found her by the main entrance, champagne in hand. Congratulations, he said, genuine pride in his voice. You've created something extraordinary here. Thank you, she replied. and thank you for accepting my counter-offer. They had reached a different kind of partnership. Ava would consult on his national projects remotely, providing design input while maintaining her own independent firm in Chicago. It wasn't what Richard had originally wanted, but he respected her enough to compromise. He's a lucky man, Richard said, glancing across the room where Andrew was chatting with her mother. Make sure he never forgets it. As Richard moved away to speak with investors, Ava made her way to Andrew, who immediately reached for her hand. So, he said with a smile, did you tell him? I did, Ava confirmed. I'm staying in Chicago. The joy that spread across Andrew's face warmed her from the inside. This was what had been missing with Richard, that bone-deep recognition, the feeling of being truly seen and understood. Later that night, as they walked through the neighborhood toward Andrew's house, the house that was slowly becoming theirs, Ava realized something important. The choice had never really been between two men. It had been between two versions of herself. With Richard, she could have been an important architect, designing landmark buildings across the country. With Andrew, she could be that and more. A daughter who stayed close to her aging mother, a community member who built spaces that mattered to people she knew by name, and a woman who honored both her ambitions and her roots. As they reached the porch of the house on Maple Street, Andrew pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Welcome home, he whispered. And in those simple words, Ava found her answer. Love wasn't about choosing between wealth and familiarity, between success and comfort. Real love, the kind that lasted, was about finding someone who saw your whole self and helped you become more fully who you were meant to be. Standing there in the glow of the porch light, Ava Williams had finally found where she belonged, not with the billionaire or with her ex, but with the man who had grown into the partner she needed, in the community that had shaped her, doing the work that gave her purpose. She was home.